friends. Isn't this wonderful? Extraordinary. I was hanging out in the lobby at the LBC at 8 o'clock this morning, and it was filling up with people waiting for the coach up to Vajrasana. And there's a very unusual sort of atmosphere there. And what it made me think of most was a pilgrimage, people setting out on a pilgrimage. And it does feel as if this is a pilgrimage that we've all taken to Vajrasana. I've personally taken many pilgrimages to the Vajrasana. I go to Bodh Gaya as often as I can. Usually every year I spend some time there. This January and into February I spent a month at Bodh Gaya leading a retreat for about 40, 50 people, which took place mainly at the temple. So we were staying at hotels and then all going down to the Mahabodhi temple, which is at the heart of the little town there. Not a very pleasant town, I have to say. I don't really like Bodh Gaya as a town. It's dirty, dusty, and very crowded, and there's that almost obscene juxtaposition of wealth and poverty, and I have friends in the locality, and just within a mile or so of Bodh Gaya itself, you'll see extreme poverty, and we're doing work with people from that sort of background. But there's something about the jostling of tourists who've got, and pilgrims even, who've got money to spare, and this extreme poverty that is really quite shocking. And of course, one's part of it too. So all of that is quite unpleasant, but then you get down to the Mahabodhi temple, you go through 2 layers of security, because there was a bomb blast there. Interestingly enough, I was there just the day before the bomb blast in the place where the blast went off. I consider myself fortunate. But you go through 2 layers of security, which is done in a rather harsh and slightly unpleasant way, and then into the temple itself. And if you go down to the level of the temple, because it had to be dug out, it was a sandbank, as I'll tell you later. And you come down to the level of the temple itself, go round the back, and there is the tree, the Mahabodhi tree, the Bodhi tree, which is, in genetic terms, it's the same tree as the Buddha sat under. It's a cutting of the original tree, but if my botany is at all correct, it's genetically exactly the same material as the original tree would have been, which is something in itself. Just thinking that what is overshadowing you, these dangling leaves, these beautiful heart-shaped leaves, were hanging over the Buddha. The ancestors of these leaves were hanging over the Buddha. And there's a very, very powerful atmosphere around the tree itself. Very, very powerful. But the tree is sort of cordoned off with rather attractive railings. You can see through quite clearly. And behind the tree, there's a big slab just between the tree and the temple itself, sort of slightly crammed in. The slab is from the period of the Emperor Ashoka, so about 300 BC, within a couple of hundred years of the Buddha's own parinirvana, his death. And the slab is on the spot where it's said that the Buddha actually gained enlightenment. And that is the Vajrasana. So I've spent a lot of time, I try to get as close to it as I can, with my nose up against the railing, just sort of looking through at that slab, and just sort of trying to absorb the fact that it happened there. It really happened there. Something, you study and you read about and given many, many talks about and so on, but it actually happened there. The most important event in human history. The Buddhist tradition would say the most important event in the universe. quite extraordinary sense of mingled disbelief and wonder. I suppose the disbelief is a basis for the wonder, if you see what I mean. And it's sometimes said it's the empty throne which is more evocative than if there was an image there. You just sit and look at that empty space. So I've been there on many a pilgrimage, just like the pilgrimage that we've all taken today. And people come from all over the world to that spot just to worship the Buddha. No doubt, 2 days ago on the Vaishakha Purnima, the full moon day of this period, there will have been many, many people there, even though Bihar at that time of year is stinking hot. It's horribly hot. I've been there in June, and to move is to sweat. Actually, to be is to sweat. And it's really hot. Bhante described walking through Bihar at about this time of year as walking through a curtain of fire. It's extremely hot. But people would have gone from all over the world. Interestingly enough, just as people have come from all over the world to be here today. I'm delighted to see that Romy has just flown in from Mexico City just to be with us today. Where is she? There she is. Todd has flown from New York just to be here today. He might have some other reasons, but he's here. No doubt. There are others here who've come from far and wide. That's the essence of a pilgrimage, isn't it? You're drawn together by the same ideal, by the same worship. So yes, Bodh Gaya is a place where the original Vajrasana was. The place where the original Vajrasana was. So just because it is Buddha Day, let's just remember a little bit what happened. Just remember that the Buddha brought up, according to the earliest traditions, in a degree of wealth. Later tradition says that he was a prince and so forth, but probably he was simply a sort of aristocrat. He was a kshatriya, that is, a landholder and a warrior. And he became dissatisfied. He became frustrated, and he felt that he was cramped. He said, "Narrow and dusty is this life at home. Open is the going forth." He elsewhere said that he began to think that, why am I, being a conditioned being, chasing after what is conditioned? I'm devoting myself to things that are merely ephemeral, that come and go. Why do I not go in pursuit of that which is unconditioned, that which is not subject to birth and death? And it seems as if the sense of the frustration and futility of conventional life was too much for him. And he stole away, according to tradition, in the middle of the night, and spent some years, we don't really know how long, but he spent some years seeking the truth. We know, because this is attested quite early on, we know that he studied with two shramanas, two wanderers, who were leaders of big groups, Uddaka Ramaputra and Alara Kalama, and he learnt everything they had to teach. He attained whatever they'd attained. In fact, they offered him the teaching throne, as it were, beside them. But he knew it wasn't enough. You know the story well, but we have to keep recalling it just to refresh it in our own minds. So he continued, and this is one of the features of the Buddha, isn't it? That he knew what was genuine and knew what was not. And he would not accept anything less than what was pure gold. So even though he'd attained a high state, apparently, with these teachers, he knew it was not the final answer. It was not deeply satisfying. I think it's one of the greatest things you can learn from the Buddha is to know what is true gold from what is dross or mixed or glitters like gold but is not gold. We all need to have that sense. Of course, dukkha is the sense of deep unfulfillment. It's not necessarily pain, you're not unhappy, but you know deep down that things are not fulfilled. You're not fulfilled, it's not complete. And that's the most important part of us. There's a whole path that could be laid out, and is laid out in the canon, of following through that sense of, no, this isn't it, this isn't it, this isn't it. And it's important for all of us to realize that's what took the Buddha to the Vajrasana. It's that sense of unfulfillment. This is not enough. There has to be more. There has to be more. So yes, he did his best. He tried asceticism. It's a well-tried Indian traditional route. He tried sitting at the center of 5 fires, 4 fires around him with the burning midday sun above him. He tried, he says, eating less and less fruit, so that less and less food, so that he was down to 1 grain of rice per day. And he said, you shouldn't think that a grain of rice was any bigger then than it is now. Little jokes in the Pali Canon, which can be easily overlooked. But yes, he got to the point where when he touched his belly, he touched his backbone. That when he stroked his skin, the hair fell off his skin. The flesh began to fall off his skin. He was so thin. And he realized that this was not getting him anywhere. In fact, you can go to a cave quite near Bodh Gaya called the Mahakala Cave, which is said to be where he practiced this form of extreme asceticism, and there's a statue of him. It's just a skeleton covered with a covering of skin, with all the veins standing out. So he realized this wasn't getting him anywhere, or was only getting him to death. The idea, presumably, was that if you can mortify the body, the spirit will be released. So he was pursuing a view of what makes us a human being and what is a spiritual life that he saw through at that point. So he went from that place, he wandered, until he came to a spot called Uruvela. Uruvela means sandbank. And it's on a bend in the river Naranjara, and the Naranjara river sort of wanders, so it leaves banks of sand. Even today it does this. And Uruvela, which is now the place we call Bodh Gaya, was a sandbank of that sort, with obviously a well-developed small forest on it, a number of trees. And it's interesting, the Buddha, in the course of the period he was at Uruvela, sits under various different trees, and we're told that the type of tree under which he sat. So he came to that spot, which was at that point much nearer to the river. So it was a place he could get water. There was shelter from the Bodhi tree, and yes, it was reasonably secluded. He took some grass from a wandering herdsman and took some milk rice, some nourishment, some kheer for the Indians here. He took some kheer, which is, yes, rice mixed with milk with some coconut or something like that in it, maybe some spice. And that nourished him. A goat herd gave it to him. Sujata, who her stupa is even extant now, sat down. He said, this is a suitable place for striving. This is a suitable place for striving. And he made a solemn vow that may flesh wither, may blood dry up. I will not move from this spot until I have attained my goal. That's the kind of guy he was. So he sat there, and it said that as the morning star, Venus, was rising in the sky, because he was facing east, and Venus rose in the east, as the morning star rose, light arose in his mind. He saw, he understood, he was free. And he sang or at least he said later that he sort of sang to himself. I don't know whether it was a tune or not, but he gave utterance to what is sometimes called his song of victory, which is a real paean of joy at his liberation. So I'm going to read it to you because it's obligatory. You have to read it on this day because it's what the Buddha himself said. What he said, he said. So he said, "Many a birth have I undergone in this process of faring on in the round of conditioned existence." Anek jati. Many a birth have I undergone in this process of faring on in the round of conditioned existence, seeking the builder of the house and not finding him, the house of pain, the house that we are confined in again and again. We may get pleasure within the house, but fundamentally to be constrained in that way is painful. So he's been seeking how this house comes about. What is it that creates this whole structure of existence that gives us, at the deepest level, pain, that confines and constricts, you could say, who we really are, what we really can be. But he's not been able to find that house builder. Painful is such repeated birth. So he's kind of aware of the whole sweep of things. He's aware of being born again and again, that in every birth he's trying to find fulfillment, he's trying to find freedom, he's trying to escape from this underlying dissatisfaction, which is there regardless even of your life being pleasant or even privileged or whatever. Underneath, if we look deeply enough, we know that we're not fulfilled. O house builder, now you are seen. Never again shall you build me a house. Your rafters are all broken, your ridgepole shattered. The conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. One has attained to the cessation of craving. I read it all again because it should be read again. Many a birth have I undergone in this process of faring on in the round of conditioned existence, seeking the builder of the house and not finding him. Painful is such repeated birth. O house builder, now you are seen. Never again shall you build me a house. Your rafters are all broken, your ridgepole shattered. The conditioned mind too has gone to destruction. One has attained to the cessation of craving. One way you could translate the conditioned mind too has gone to destruction is that the mind has been deconditioned, because our minds are bound up with things. We identify ourselves entirely with our bodies, with our position in life, with our status, with our history and so forth. We think that's who we are. We identify ourselves with our emotions, with our thoughts, and even with our desires. We identify with all that. We even identify with our consciousness in the limited sense. But the Buddha lets go. He unbinds. He's no longer identified with all these things that are the normal constructs of our identity. He lets them go. And in letting them go, he's free. Because it's because of our conditioned character, because we identify with conditioned things, that we suffer. We crave them, we hate them. That gives rise to our suffering. We try to protect our identity. That gives rise to our suffering. So when we see through our attachment to conditioned things, we're free. That's what happened on the day of enlightenment. That's what the Buddha did. So we've done the necessary repetition of what the broad outline of the Buddha's career up until enlightenment. But I want to revert to that phrase of the Buddha's that this is a suitable place for striving. What made that spot a suitable place for striving? What made it the Vajrasana? Asana means posture, of course, as you know in yoga, but it also means a seat or a place. So suitable place for striving, the place of the Vajra, the place where the fundamental energies are at their strongest. So what made Bodh Gaya, Uruvela, that particular place, suitable for striving? Well, of course, partly it was because there was shade, because there was seclusion, because there was a river flowing by where he could get water and so forth. You could put it in quite material terms. But Buddhist tradition says there's much, much more to it. There's another reason why that was a suitable place for striving. Sometimes it's put simply in terms of that's where all the Buddhas of the past gained enlightenment. But that's not quite satisfactory. So we need to take a larger perspective, and we need to delve a little bit into Buddhist cosmogony, the traditional view of what the world is. And the traditional view is that in the vast magnitude, the infinite magnitude of space and time, there are infinite universes. Infinite universes. Buddhism held this point of view 2,500 years ago, that we are not alone. This is just one universe amidst many universes. And these universes are subject to the same laws of conditioned arising as anything else. So universes come into being, they achieve a sort of flowering, and then they break down and pass away. And when they pass away, they pass away into what is called a fire wind. There's just fire. In fact, I read that some cosmologists today believe that the universe will end with the heat death of the universe. I can't remember the details of it, but I probably never really understood them. But that everything sort of dissolves into fire, and there's just undifferentiated fire. And gradually, that fire begins to form. And it forms particularly into two great winds, two cosmic winds, which blow across each other. So these winds are the most powerful forces you can imagine. They're the deepest energies of existence, of conditioned existence. And they're represented by a Vajra. So, you know, the Vajra is a traditional Buddhist and indeed more widely Indian symbol for a thunderbolt. It's a stylized thunderbolt. And I said the other day that at Olympia in the Peloponnese in Greece, at the site of where the Olympic Games first started, there's a wonderful museum. The site was dedicated to the god Zeus, and Zeus was, of course, the thunderbolt bearer. And there are statues of Zeus in that museum holding a Vajra, almost exactly the same as the Vajra that you see in the Tibetan tradition, that you see Akshobhya holding in the Akshobhya courtyard there. So it's a stylized thunderbolt because for early peoples who didn't have a sort of scientific understanding of things, so they had their own understanding, thunder and lightning were unimaginable forces. Thunder could erupt, lightning could strike, and it just destroys. Just a bolt from the blue, as they say, without any understanding of what it was. They just assumed it was the action of some god. And the thunderbolt became a symbol for something transcendent that was ultimately destructive, destroyed ignorance, that was itself incapable of being destroyed. Wisdom is not to be destroyed. and that cannot be lost to the one who wields it. You may wield wisdom, but it comes back to you. You throw the Vajra, but it returns to your hand. So it's a symbol for ultimate realization and its activation within the world. But at this stage, before enlightenment has arisen, we're just seeing the two Vajras coming towards each other and colliding and forming the double Vajra, the Vishva Vajra that we see there in front of the shrine, and that is now held by Sadakara as the holder of the Vishva Vajra at Vajraloka. Vajra, where are we? Vajrasana. Sadaketu, what did I say? Anyway, it's Sadaketu, whoever. Any name I use is arguable. But the Vajrasana, the double Vajra is the coming together of these fundamental forces. Maybe you could say yin and yang, although that's not an Indian way of thinking. Whatever it is, it's these two absolutely fundamental forces that are each of them unstoppable, indestructible, but that collide and sort of form something solid. And then on the basis of that solid double Vajra, Visva means all or even world, on the basis of that, the whole world system forms. So everything crystallizes on the basis of a double Vajra. So somewhere down there, ancient Buddhists believed, is huge. I mean, huge doesn't do it. Vast. That doesn't do it either. Anyway, very big. Double Vajra, on which everything sits. Now, the point where those two Vajras cross is the Vajrasana. That's where the Buddha sat, according to tradition. So it's on that spot that the Buddhas of the past and the Buddhas of the future sit, and the Buddha of the present, of our present era, sat on that spot. It's, according to that tradition, that's what is represented by the Vajrasana slab at Bodh Gaya. It's the spot where the universe began to crystallize, and when the universe breaks down, this universe breaks down, it'll be the last spot to dissolve into the firestorm, the fire wind. Of course, it's mythological, but it has a very deep meaning. The Buddha sat on the central point of the universe. Well, in a way, I don't particularly want to spell it all out. You should be able to see it for yourselves. But what it's really getting at is that the enlightenment itself is the pivotal point in human history. And of course, as Buddhists, we don't believe there's only one Buddha. There are said to be Buddhas in many, many different world systems. In Mahayana and Vajrayana practice, you actually connect with Buddhas in different world systems. Those of you who are familiar with the Pure Land tradition, you're trying to connect with the Buddha Amitabha, who lives in the world system Sukhavati, the place of happiness, and you can call upon him, and you can be reborn in his realm. You know, you won't find this through an astronomical telescope, but it's telling us something about the nature of the universe, of the larger universe, space-time itself. Space-time itself has within it the constant potential for enlightenment. Enlightenment can come at any point, at any time in the evolution of things. Situations, circumstances evolve to a point at which someone breaks through. Someone sees through the illusion that we all dwell within and sees the ultimate reality, and then opens the doors of the deathless. That's what the Buddha declared. Open are the doors of the deathless. Let those who can hear listen. He said that just in the weeks following his enlightenment. he opened the doors of the deathless, through which we are all trying to go. We have all been drawn to move through the doors of the deathless. That's what it is to be a Buddhist. We are paying attention to the Buddha's words and trying to draw ourselves to the point at which we can go through the door of the deathless. So we enter the deathless state where we're beyond birth and death, but because we've given up all identification with conditioned things. We're no longer part of conditioned reality. We function within it if we're a Buddha, but we're not identified with it. We're in it, but not of it, in the famous phrase. So what part of the symbolism of the Vajrasana is that within all these world systems, there will be a Vajrasana. There will be a point at which things begin to crystallize. And it's on that point that the Buddha of that particular place at a particular time will arise. We're talking, of course, poetic, mythic truth here, but nonetheless truth. Buddhahood is an eternal principle. It's part of the ultimate character of things. This is a universe which is so constructed that Buddhahood will arise, that enlightenment is attainable. This is the great promise of the Dhamma. This universe is, as it were, built for enlightenment. The potential for enlightenment is there all the time, anywhere, everywhere. It simply needs the arising of certain conditions and the effort to manifest that freedom. That is the message, if you like, of the Vajrasana. It's the point which arises in many places, in many universes. There's always such a point. So there's always the potential for enlightenment. So yes, enlightenment is an eternal potential. For us, it's the Buddha Shakyamuni, started as the Bodhisattva Siddhartha, who made that breakthrough on the Vajrasana, and he enabled us to follow him. He opened the doors of the deathless so that we could bring that about within ourselves. So that suggests something else about Vajrasana. It suggests that Vajrasana is not just a single point. Yes, sort of mytho-historically, it's the single point where the two Vajras meet at Bodh Gaya or in whatever other world system. But in a way, the Vajrasana is wherever anybody sits who is striving sincerely for liberation. So whenever we sit somewhere with a very strong effort to transform ourselves, to liberate ourselves, well, the Vajrasana is beginning to manifest. We're sitting on the Vajrasana. Quite often in the Tibetan tradition, they will sit on little carpets, and those carpets will be embroidered with the Vajrasana. And you'll see when somebody like the Dalai Lama speaks, the lectern in front of his throne will have a banner in front of it with a Vajrasana on it, because he's speaking symbolically from the Vajrasana. So the Vajrasana is wherever anybody who sincerely strives for enlightenment, or anybody who, with truth, tries to express the Dhamma, it's where they sit. So we all carry within us the vague outlines of Vajrasana. There's a Vajrasana, you could say, in our own hearts. There's a vague, misty outline. This fire wind is beginning to crystallize as we take our practice deeper, as we engage with the Dhamma more and more deeply, as we come to this Vajrasana more and more and practice together here very deeply, intensely. That Vajrasana will become stronger and stronger. So that when you sit on the Vajrasana, when you really sit on the Vajrasana, you're absolutely unshakable. You sit at the central point of the universe. Nothing can shift you. Nothing can disturb you. You have all the energy that you require in order to gain enlightenment. So yes, when we're here, we're recalling the 7th anniversary of the opening of the new Vajrasana. I don't know when the older Vajrasana came into being. It was some years before that, before this wonderful building was erected. There was an old farmstead actually, but that was pulled down, and this was built 7 years ago. It was opened. So we're celebrating the 7th anniversary of that. We're also celebrating the events that took place at the Vajrasana of our world system, the Vajrasana that is found at Buddha Gaya, where the Buddha himself gained enlightenment. But we should be, at least, trying to connect with the Vajrasana, well, that is ours, the spot where we sit, which gives us the power, the strength to break through. Probably anybody who's listened to my talk will know that I'm an old hippie, and I was delighted to read the works of Carlos Castaneda. Yeah, I was brought up on those with my mother's milk, as it were, with my mother's dope. But that's a joke. My mother certainly wouldn't have smoked dope. Anybody who met her would know that. A whiskey, yes, but not dope. Anyway, I remember that one of the first things that Don Juan, his sorcerer, his shaman, does for him is make him try to find his spot in the room. And he doesn't know what to do, and Don Juan won't tell him. He just says, you'll know when you're there, and you'll also know when you're not there. So poor Carlos has to crawl all over the floor of the room, and apparently it goes on all night, and eventually he's just completely exhausted, and he sits and slumps against the wall and just relaxes, and Don Juan says, you're there. So if you like, of course in the language of the shamans of the Mexican tradition, they were seeking the point of power. But you could say that in a way the point of power for us is the Vajrasana. We're seeking the Vajrasana. We're trying to find the point on which we sit, where we have the energy, the power, the confidence, the freedom, the protection. We're safe. We're able to face anything that comes. Let Mara's armies come. Let his daughters dance. We can face anything because we're on the Vajrasana. So let us remember, while we're celebrating the event that took place in Bodh Gaya 2,000, nearly 600 years ago, let us also remember that, we're celebrating this Vajrasana, which is a very suitable place for striving. Many have come here for retreats, many have come on solitary retreats, and always speak of the supportiveness of the situation and how much it makes it easier to meditate. But let's not forget that the Vajrasana is for us. Each of us, if you like, can participate in the Vajrasana. You could say each of us has our own Vajrasana. In a way, I prefer to say each of us can find the Vajrasana for ourselves, so that we can sit and make our efforts to make the kind of breakthrough, break away from conditioned existence, just as the Buddha did. So thank you all very much for listening to me. I hope that I've at least evoked a little bit what happened in Bodh Gaya and what this place is really about. And I hope you've got a better understanding of the cosmic significance of the Vajrasana. It's not a small thing. Don't go questioning astronomers or particle physicists about this. But it tells a very deep truth. And it tells a truth about the universe, because there's always a Vajrasana in every universe. And it tells a deep truth about us. Every one of us has a Vajrasana. We've just got to find that spot, crawling all over the place in our lives till we arrive at that spot and we know this is a suitable place for striving.